And what has been my crime? My crime has been to confess publicly Christ as Savior.
The signs are rapidly fulfilling.
I suppose good afternoon or good evening or wherever you are, good morning, and happy Sabbath as well. So I don't think there's much about me, but yes, I'm a young man. I'm age 35, married, and I've got 4 children. I'm originally from the city of London, and I moved from London to Derby because the Lord was working on my young life at that stage to be a tool and an instrument for Him. As a young man, I had ambitions to work for the government in the Secret Service. So I was very desirous of that. But praise the Lord, He rescued my young little mind and He educated me in a different path to be a servant for Him. So I moved to Derby and I met my wife there at Bible school. And we had a desire to grow in the light that we had been learning as young people, especially reading the book Messages to Young People. And then we had an opportunity to move to Wales, and that's where I will probably start the story. So as you can see on your screen, I've got some topics that I wanted to talk about: God, land, houses, jobs, finances, problems, transport, and family. So hopefully we can try and keep within the ethos and the blessing of the Sabbath, but touch on some of these issues that I believe will be beneficial to us, and that has also been beneficial to myself. I'm going to start with this quotation here. God brought the Hebrews into the mountain fatness before the sea that He might manifest His power and signally humble the pride of their oppressors. He chose this method to test their faith and strengthen their trust in Him. If the people had held back when Moses bade them advance, God would never have opened the path for them. It was by faith that they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land. In marching down to the very water, they showed that they believed the word of God spoken by Moses. Then the mighty one of Israel divided the sea to make a path for their feet. So as the presentation is entitled, Getting Our Feet Wet, often it says, life is beset by dangers and duty seems hard to perform. Imagination pictures impending ruin, yet the voice of God speaks clearly, go forward. We should obey this command, even though our eyes cannot penetrate the darkness and we feel the cold waves about our feet. Those who defer obedience till every uncertainty disappears and there remains no risk of failure or defeat will never obey at all. But faith courageously urges an advance. The path where God leads may lie through the desert or the sea, but it is a safe path. To make no move that calls for the investment of means unless we have the money in hand to complete the completed work should not always be considered the wisest plan. In the upbuilding of His work, the Lord does not always make everything plain before His servants. He sometimes tries the confidence of His people by having them move forward in faith. Often, He brings them into straight and trying places, bidding them go forward when their feet seem to be touching the waters of the Red Sea. It is at such a time, when the prayers of His servants ascend to Him in earnest faith, that He opens the way before them and brings them into a large place. The Lord wants His people in these days to believe that He will do, now I'm going to add a bit of emphasis on this one, as great things for them as He did for the children of Israel in their journey from Egypt to Canaan. We are to have an educated faith that will not hesitate to follow His instructions in the most difficult experiences. Go forward is the command of God to His people. Can you see me? I don't know. You can just see the screen.
Yeah, I think you're gone off camera. And
I've got a camera, yeah?
yeah.
You can see. Okay, no problem.
We can see the screen.
That's fine. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to emphasize on those quotations there is because, as I'm sure you and your own experiences have experienced, that you want to do something, you want to work for the Lord, you want to move into the country places, but all the obstacles that you could possibly think of comes up. But notice these quotations are basically saying, just go forward. Next quotation, it says, go forward, God said to Israel, when the flowing waters of the Red Sea blocked their passage as they moved out in the path which Providence had indicated. As they placed their feet in the waters of the sea, they did what the Lord required of them. They did not see what God would do next. They did not see the broad path opened for them by the power of God until they manifested their faith by moving forward. And then God's power was revealed. The waters on either side were piled up like a wall, leaving an open path before them. The voice of God bidding his faithful ones go forward frequently tries their faith to the utmost, but we must not seek for some object upon which to hang our doubts and unbelief. If we wait until every shadow of uncertainty is removed, we shall never plant our feet upon the platform of eternal truth. Those who will not allow the light because some things are not entirely clear to their understanding will never believe the truth. Faith is not certainty. It is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. God will do marvelous, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, marvelous things for those who trust in him. It is because his professed people trust so much to their own wisdom and do not give the Lord an opportunity to reveal his power in their behalf, that they have not more strength. He will help his believing children in every emergency. If they will place their entire confidence in him, he will work mightily for a faithful people who obey his word without questioning or doubt. So, my move to Wales. How did I do it? Well, there was an opportunity when we lived in Derby. We lived in a flat. It was a 3-floor flat, council flat that we had. And when my son, Mishael, came, we were very concerned about, his spirituality, his welfare, and we wanted to make sure that we raised him in the best environment. So while we were in that room, we would open up the window, and sadly, the young lady downstairs was a smoker, and the smoke would come up and rise and, perfume our room with the smoke. And it was just really disturbing and not very nice to raise him up in such an environment. So we had a desire to move, but where do we go? How do we do it? Finances, money, where do we live, etc. So these situations were before our minds. But the desire to move was wholly around him, 100% around him. We just had one child at that point in time, but we were desperate to make that move. Some quotes came to us as we studied the book Child Guidance and Country Living. It says, through the working of trusts and the results of labor unions and strikes, the conditions of life in the city are constantly becoming more and more difficult. Serious troubles are before us, and for many families, removal from the cities will be a necessity. We saw a necessity to remove from where we were. Now, we wasn't in the city like in London. We was more kind of like on the outskirts, but we were housed with other people, and that's a necessarily bad thing. But when you want to be within your own environment, your self-autonomy, and also raise your children in a place of tranquility, you have more of a desire, more of a push. The physical surroundings in the cities are often a peril to health. We saw the smoke coming up, the fumes. It wasn't ideal for us. The constant liberty to contact with disease, the prevalence of foul air, impure water, impure food, the crowded, dark, unhealthy dwellings are some of the many evils to be met, and we did meet them. And then I came across this quotation, which prompted me with more passion. It was not God's purpose that people should be crowded into cities, huddled together in terraces and tenements. And if you look at what terraces and tenements are, they're basically houses crammed together. And they built them during just after the war because they just needed to find houses. And To this day, people are still living in such environments like that. In the beginning, he placed our first parents amidst the beautiful sights and sounds he desires us to rejoice in today. The more nearly we come into harmony with God's original plan, the more favorable will be our position to secure health, body, mind, and soul. The more nearly. So we're not always going to get there, but if we start to make that transition step by step, you move from a large city, London, to a smaller place where in the UK, so we did it from London to Derby, and from Derby we went more rural and coming into Wales. Through the working of trust, and sorry, yeah, it's the same one there. I quoted that one there. So, as I was saying before, the flat that we had, it had that smoker, and the smoke would rise. But then we had a young person who wasn't living in Wales at that point in time, and they spoke to us and they said, I heard that you're looking to move to the country. And we said, yeah. And they said, well, we've got a friend who has, they had about 10 acres of land, and they had a static caravan. There's different types of caravans, but this one was what we call a mobile home in their garden. And they literally had that there to help people who wanted to leave the cities to come and live there and start their journey. So it was about a 12-foot caravan, 2 beds in there, and a log burner. Log burner is basically a wooden stove where you put your logs in, as we know. I had a little porch where we could wash our clothes, and it was connected with gas, and it had electricity connected to the house. And we would pay a little small stipend or whatever income we had to support ourselves there. Now, my wife had traveled to Wales before, so the family, it was a husband and a wife, elderly couple, they had known her. And so they were happy to talk to us over the phone, see our desire. And they were Adventists as well. And they said, yeah, no problem. We'll come and get you. So the husband drove all the way down to Wales with his little trailer. We packed up the trailer with all our personal possessions, everything else that we didn't need, we sold. And he drove the trailer down, and we followed a day or two behind to meet at the property. The house was lovely. It was in a picturesque location. Sadly, we didn't have photos of it anymore. It was a picturesque location. It was tranquil. There were sheep in the field. And when we arrived there, we took a deep breath and we thought, wow, what a start to a journey. Our son was probably about 9 months old at this point in time. So we were happy that we were making that transition, that start. As you can see, we were there for about 3 months, 2 to 3 months. And while we were there, I got used to living in the property. I got used to experiencing that country life, but I didn't have a job at this point in time. Now, I was offered a job. So beforehand, and if you notice in the quotes, it said, some people wait till every hindrance, every obstacle is planned out, then they make the move. And that was me. I said, how do I move from one country, Derby, England, to another one, Wales, without a job, without a house or anything? So I made sure that I had a tick box of everything that needed to be done first before I made the move. So I contacted a few employers and I called them. I had some interviews. I came down, and I don't know if you remember, but there was this scheme going back in the day called PPI. And that was when the banks were overcharging people. Now, I didn't know this job interview that I went for was a PPI job. I just thought it was just a normal job where you're talking to customers on the phone and helping them get money back for things. So I sat in the interview, and then the gentleman asked me questions, and I used to work in sales. So he said to me, he picked up a pen off the table and he said, sell me this pen. And I sold him the pen, basically by describing it and telling him the wonderful things about this wonderful pen. He said, you know what, I really like you. I'm going to give you the job. I was over the moon. I was excited. We were ready to move. When we got to Wales and I went to start the job, I sat in the training room and I realized that was PPI, aggressive selling. And I wasn't used to that. And I felt defrauded. I felt I've come all this way, given up my job that I had for this, which wasn't really a legitimate job or an honest serving job, which I felt. And I was disappointed with God. I said, you knew that I was walking into this opportunity thinking that it was a great job. Now, the Lord knew that I would not have come had I known everything about that job. And I felt that the Lord used that opportunity to bring me into that place. Now, some people think, well, would the Lord do that? I mean, that sounds really strange, but no, he did do it for me. And he did it because that was the opportunity to get me to where I needed to be. So I didn't have a job at this point in time, but it wasn't that bad because we were living in this caravan, and it was helping to get us prepared to find a job and to find another accommodation. While I was living in this caravan, the wood burner was center, and it was lined with a chimney breast, but it was all made, it was actually adapted inside. We got the fire going, but this time we put coal, and there's a special coal called anthracite, which burned very, very hot. Now, people have lived in this caravan for many, many years beforehand. We went in there, we stayed there for a while, but then there was one occasion where we got the fire going, and this fire was really hot. I walked out of the room to go and do something, and as I walked back into the room, I saw smoke coming out of the sides of the chimney breast. I panicked. I told my wife, she panicked, and we just started to get in all our possessions and throw them out the window. We grabbed our baby and we walked out. And as we walked out, it burst into flames. The owner, or our friend, he came in and he tried to put the fire out, but he sadly put water on it and it burnt back into him and it singed his hands. So we were waiting down and we just saw the fire starting to engulf the caravan, but not to the extent of burning it down. It was just engulfing that front living room area. Now, we call the fire engine. Now, in Wales, especially in the rural parts, fires are very rare. I mean, fires happen, but they're pretty rare. And we have fire stations which aren't always active. It turned out we had 2 fire engines from different parts of the area racing to come to put out that fire. Now, that's a good thing, absolutely. But it was pretty interesting because it showed that they were active, that they were needed, and that their job was required. So one fire engine got stuck in the mud while the other one raced to come there. They extinguished the fire. All was well. Everything was safe. Nothing was too damaged, but we were homeless. So we stayed in the couple's house. They had a pretty big house. They lived at one side, and then they had another room upstairs in the attic. We lived there, lamenting, disappointing, sad that we had come, burnt down their caravan, and, what happens now? But the Lord obviously had a plan. In that stage, we had to go into emergency accommodation, which, if you've ever been in a situation, they will put you anywhere. We were homeless. We were in emergency accommodation, and that's where we lived. My wife, my son, and it was one of those situations where we had to put a key into the meter to top it up. So it was very expensive. And any kind of money I would get, I would put it towards that, still looking for a job. The authorities turned to us and said, okay, well, we've managed to find a property for you. So we'll get you into the property. Now, when we looked to see where this property was, it was just like where we were coming from in Derby, a little townhouse with loads of other houses around, no garden, and terraces and tenements all glued together. And we felt, we've come from that to have a nice little country rental home, or kind of any money that we can put towards it in the caravan, to now going back. And we felt, Lord, no, we didn't want to do this. But we didn't have a choice. We needed somewhere to house ourselves. So we said, okay, we took it. But this time we fell on our knees and said, Lord, we feel you've led us this far. Now what? A few days later, the council called us and they said, unfortunately, the house isn't ready. There was a burst pipe and the ceiling literally fell through the floor. My wife was overjoyed. She said, amen. That's good. We don't have to go to that place. So I thought, well, that's true, but then where do we go? Anyway, I went to go and visit the family, the husband and the wife who had housed us in their caravan. And as I was there, I went to the local post office, just looking and seeing what things I could get. And I noticed there was a notice board by the door and it said house for rent. So I called the number up and the lady invited me to come and see the property. Now, the house is in a place called Siloam and Clondalvery, Wales. Now, in Wales, it's a very religious place. Most of the places around it have religious names. Clan in Wales means church on waters. So we were basically situated in a place called Siloam, in the church on waters. The house that we found was about £450, a pretty reasonable rent. Now, by this time, I'd secured myself a job in a It was a school for children with learning disabilities, but it was in 150 acres of land. We saw this job advertised, and I went for the interview and got the job. So money was now starting to come in for me. But I don't know if any one of you have rented or renting, or maybe you've got mortgages or anything like that. But whenever you go into rent a home, you need to have something called a deposit. Now, a young family starting out in a new job, moving to a new country, that was a bit of a challenge for us. So I did a bit of research to find out how I can get this deposit. How can I find the money to support me with this? And there was something in Wales called a bond scheme. And what it was, it's a community that has a pot of funds who support people with a low income and who are able to then support them to pay for that deposit. So they don't actually physically give you money. They write a little notice of guarantee to cover any expenses that happens to the property if it gets damaged or anything like that. So they came and inspected the home. They said, just absolutely fine. They wrote the deposit scheme. We handed it to the landlord. She was happy and grateful for that. And she gave us the keys. We moved in the following week. So this is the location that the home is in. So if you can see the first arrow on the screen there, can you see that arrow there? Can you all hear me still? Have I lost you all?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm seeing the arrow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that was the house. That was the first house that we had after the fire. And obviously we stayed in a little emergency accommodation. And this is the homes there. So as you can see, it's not very big. It's a small little community there. And if you notice, there's another arrow here. So while we were living in this house, now, Wales, it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. So this house belonged to our landlord. The field here was her brother's farm. And then this house over here was her sister's home. Now, when we lived in this home, she would tell us that there was another house that she had, this one here, for rent. So we had another family who was desirous to move to Wales as well. So we told her about it, and she came and she moved into this house there. So it was nice to have a nice little community of two families living literally next door to each other to bolster, to encourage, and to start that country living journey. So we were both renting the two family members' home. So there's another view of the home here, massive front garden that we stayed in, and we were happy. We were blessed to be in here. Yes, we had another wood stove, but I learned my lesson this time. So I was very careful and very mindful about heating the property there. Two chimneys there. It was a 3-bedroom house with 2 reception rooms. It was ideal for us. Plenty of space for the children, or for our son at that time, to run and play in the garden. And life was good. But it's never without its hurdles and situations. Now, this plot here, as you can see, was where our first garden would have been. So we started to see what we could do to start growing our own little foods. And the farmer behind us was very kind. He came and dropped manure down into that little plot here, which meant that we can start growing our little vegetables and experiencing what the beginning of country living was like. Now, this young man here and his sister, that's my wife there, they came over and helped us do some gardening. We grew beetroots and carrots and broccoli and potatoes. And this was something new for me. Now, I'd never grown anything before. So seeing the way that these beetroots were coming large, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I was really starting to get into the mindset of growing your own food and being independent. But of course, we rented still. We were still subject to the 9-to-5 type of rigor. But it was nice to be able to be in a situation like this. Now, country living comes with its hurdles and its trials and its situations. The neighbor next door to me, he, whether he was a little bit jealous, I don't know, but he started to complain a little bit, because if I go back a slide, this is his border here. And the manure, when the farmer dumped it, would lean a little bit onto his wall, and it would kind of tilt it a little bit. And he started to get a little bit bumpy. He didn't say anything at first and started to express a little bit of discomfort and annoyance. And then eventually he started getting a little bit unkind and unloving. So I felt I didn't want to keep my family in this situation. So I decided to look for somewhere else that was more isolated, a little bit more raw, but still close to our working situation. So I want us to turn to Matthew 7, verse 7. Just let me know when you're there, just so I know that I've got everyone together. Are we there? Are we there, Bevan?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So it says, ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Now, in my life and in my studies of the scriptures, I see that when we read these stories, especially as a young child, I would always think that they're abstract. They're out there. You know, we hear about the stories of the woman at the well and seeing the beauty of the gospel. We hear about the woman with Elisha with the cruise oil and a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. And we look at those stories as abstract. And I don't know if we ever bring those stories into our modern day life. Anyhow, I started to read this and we started to say, Lord, yeah, I want to ask. We want somewhere else. We want somewhere that's a little bit more country and a bit more isolated in the sense of we don't have to deal with neighbors who may have contention or issues or anything like that. Be peaceful with all men, but there are some situations that some things just don't work out pretty well. So I started to ask God and I started to claim this verse. So I started to drive around the area, and I would drive around because when I would go to work, there'll be other different routes that I would take. And as I was driving, I came down this road here. So can you see the field? And you can see this barn here, and you can also see this house here. Can we see that? So this house here, so there's the village. So this road, it starts in this village here called Gwynfa. You travel all the way down here, come to this plot, this house here. This house was for sale. So I pulled up my car and I looked out and I thought, oh, wow, this is a nice house. And I went in the gate and I looked around and I thought, oh, this is a really nice house. It was detached, as you can see. And these were the pictures that we managed to find on the estate agent's website. And looking through the pictures, let's go back. Oops, sorry. It's not going. Let's go back up there, sorry. Yeah, we're looking through the pictures and we thought this is actually a really nice location. So anyway, we called the estate agent and we asked about the house. We said what the price was. We showed a bit of interest. And she said, yes, well, the house is actually being sold independently. What that means is that they were advertising it. And once they advertised it, they will send the landlord or the owner to come in, meet the prospective people to show them around the house. So we said, yeah, that's fine. Set up an appointment. And the house was going for £250,000. Bear in mind, I'm coming from a rental home. I don't have any money. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have any such assets. But I'm working. Found a job. I'm working. So anyway, the landlord comes and he shows us around the house. I put on my best clothes, shows us around the house, shows us the pictures. Kurt takes us inside. He shows us the fireplace. And I'm very impressed. So we stand in right here. So right by the front of the house here, and he tells me, by the way, the roof, he just says, by the way, the roof had something called asbestos in it. Now, if you know about asbestos, it can be dangerous if disturbed, but it was never disturbed. It was just as a disclaimer, he thought he'd tell us that. And he said, you know, I like your house. I think it's a very, very nice house, but I'll be very honest with you. I don't have the money to buy your house. And he said, oh, I said, I'll make you a proposal. I'll rent your house from you. And when the time comes that someone comes to buy the house, then we'll move out. And he thought to himself, and he said, yeah, I'll have to think about it. And I said, that's fine. You think about it. and you get back to me. I had total confidence that the Lord was going to give us this house. How did I know? Well, I just trusted. I put my feet in the water and I went forward. So I went home, and a day or two later, he gave us a call. He says, I spoke to my wife and we've decided to rent the house to you. And he named the price that he wanted to rent it. He said, I think he said it was around £600 or so. And I said, oh, well, that's good. However, it's a bit higher than what we are paying where we are. And he said, oh, so what are you paying? And I told him, and he said, okay, I'll speak to my wife again and I'll let you know. A day or so later, he calls me back and says, we're willing to match the same price that you're paying in that rental home. So we said, absolutely. Paperwork done. We got the keys and we moved into this house. Now, you may not be able to see from all the photos, but just behind this field there is 2 acres. It comes in 2 different paddocks. So 2 acres of land. So we had access to 2 acres of land plus a little river. Now the property has its own well. So we had free water that came from a well. Now, let me just say that this house was for sale. And we managed to get the owner, the landlord, to be willing to rent the house to us for a period of time. So they took the house off the market for us to rent at that period of time. And during that time, we rented that house. We had beautiful experiences, not only growing our own food, but also being friendly with the neighbors around and having a nice experience to raise our children. My daughter was actually born in this house. So it meant a lot to us. The area was very symbolic and very blessed for us to be in here. An opportunity came up as well that the owner was willing to sell us the house. He said to us he's looking to sell the house, but he wanted to give us first refusal. But we didn't really have the funds to purchase the property. So we declined. But he was still willing to allow us to keep renting it up until the time that that sale and that transaction was going to go through. We didn't end up purchasing the house, but there is another story connected with this location, which hopefully we'll probably get into, if it's not today, in our next lesson, our next discussion about it. So if I bring us back to, let me just see if I've got another slide that I just want to show you here. Yeah, so let me just bring you to this slide here. So this area here is called the Black Mountain, and it's literally a mountainous region. There are hills that go all the way up, and this is where many people come for their hikes and their experiences to just enjoy life out in the country. And it's something that we really valued and enjoyed. Now, not far from this place was an abandoned house, which I'll talk about. Now, we rented a few houses while we were in Wales. That was our only means of finding properties. And we realized that not only looking for houses on the market where you can rent, but also finding the houses that were for sale that most people just either couldn't afford or just wasn't selling, asking the landlords to buy, instead of buying the properties, to see if you can rent them from them. And they were always willing, because they realized that it's better to receive a rental from the houses than to just leave them there dormant. So the experience of going by faith and asking these individuals to do such a thing was becoming bold and allowing me to see that God can open up avenues. But the struggle that we had was renting wasn't always ideal. You couldn't really do anything to the houses. If there was problems with it, well, you just have to live with that and cope with that. And our prayer passionately was, Lord, give us a house of our own. And for the 13 years we've been here, we've been either looking for a house or going to opportunities to buy a house. but it never really worked out, whether the funding wasn't there or the house that you was going to try and buy wasn't ideal. And our family grew, and I felt more impressed to keep the same desire, the same vision to have something rule in the country. And I realized to myself that to live the life that we were told in the beginning, the country, finding the opportunities to raise your children, required means, serious means, especially to live the way that we desire to live today. And that was becoming increasingly difficult and a struggle. So on my way to work around in the same area, in this village, so I would travel from the house and travel around, and there would be this this derelict old little barn that I would always pass by every now and then. And I always pass it. And somebody always told me to go and inquire, go in and ask some questions. I never did. And the reason why I did, because I thought, well, what would me be doing looking at this old abandoned building? You know, it's all overgrown, filled with trees, you know, there's no desire for it. Now, my daughter, as I said, was born in this house. 5 years passed, and I didn't heed the Lord's voice in checking out that house. We eventually moved from this house because it did get sold, and we moved to another location. I went to university and I studied, and we had settled in maybe about an hour away from this location. We did some traveling, and there was a time when I went on holiday and I came back and I passed our old house, this house here, and it was bringing back memories to me and my children. And as we passed it, the Lord said, turn your head and look. And I looked and I said, oh yeah, I remember this road. We used to come down this road and there's that abandoned building. Now this is 5 years later. There's that abandoned building. And he said, go and visit that building. And this time I thought, well, you know what? Why not? We're coming down. It was a nice little drive. So the following Sunday, this was a Sabbath, following Sunday, I went and visited the building. And I walked into the location. That's probably be ideal for me to show you that, but I'll show you just some pictures in it shortly. I looked around and I saw this old building and I saw the little field and I thought, oh wow, this is pretty nice. And I did some research. I found out that the building was not only abandoned, it wasn't owned. Not only was it not owned, it was not registered. I did some research and kind of putting in or cutting out a lot of information, but I'll kind of cover those with some questions, which I'm sure you may have. In the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned about putting your feet in the water. And many people, as the quotation says, hesitate in moving to the country, number one, because finances, money. And if you've got money, if you've got capital, if you've got a house, if you've got a mortgage, great, you can remortgage or you can sell that house. And usually if you move into a different place, particularly out of Wales or Scotland, you can find it cheaper. But what if you don't have any money? What if you're only just renting like myself? What if you're a young couple or a young family who are struggling and making means meet? And because of the desire to homeschool, if you do homeschool, or to raise your children in the Lord, one of the family members has to either work and the other one's out home with the children. And if you have a large family, then you're more passionate about raising them for the Lord. And you don't want to compromise on it. Then what do? How do you live the life that we read in those quotations? Most of us probably give up and we don't make a move because we think it's not possible. And this was my kind of cry to the Lord. Why is it so hard for my generation? We read in the stories of Ellen White where they would find properties and they would buy them for really cheap and it was very easy. And you think, is that possible now when you look at the market? Had I heeded the Lord's call 5 years prior when living in this house, it was called Cartref, which means home. Had I heeded the Lord's call, I would have found and established my home, but I didn't. I was a little bit, well, I didn't feel like going and discovering an abandoned, overgrown building. But in the end, I was desirous to learn about this property. So then the Sunday came and I asked my neighbor, which actually lives, so they would live Let me see if I can find their building now. Yeah, here it is. So this is the house Cartref where we live, the rental, and this is where the neighbor was. So I asked my neighbor, I said to her, do you know who owns that building over there? And she says, oh, it's actually been there for many years. I don't know, but I'll find out for you, because we were interested. Well, if we could find some money to purchase it, so be it. She comes back and says, you know what? Nobody actually owns it. And I said, praise the Lord. The point I'm trying to get to is that it is possible to find property in the UK, anywhere in the world, I suppose. This law is relevant everywhere, but in the UK with no money, free in a sense. And all you have to do is follow the legal process to acquire that property. It does take a bit of time, but there is a legal process. It's called squatter's right, or in other words, it's called adverse possession, which is the process of finding abandoned, unowned land and acquiring that land. And this opportunity was opened to me, and I jumped upon it. And I've been in possession of it for the last 2 years now. And I'll hopefully show you some pictures if I get them on the screen. I didn't get to include them here. And interestingly, the property where we used to live, so where I just showed you, I think it was just down the side there, where we used to live, there is a bridle path or a footpath. And if you take this footpath, it takes you right to the abandoned property that I didn't go and visit. So in a sense, it's actually, you can actually draw, and this is very funny, you can actually draw a heart around the property that I used to live in and this abandoned property. But I never knew about that bridle path. I just kind of saw the gate there, but I never actually went down it. So 5 years later, we come back into the area, we see this property, and this time I have a bit more confidence to put my feet in the water and test it. So I called up the necessary government bodies and the legal authorities, and I asked them about the property, and they say, yes, the property is unowned, it's unregistered. So what I suggest you do, if you want it, go and claim it. And that's what I did. 2 years later, we are here today. Now, we're not living in the property, but we are maintaining it, we're looking after it. And the plan is to re-establish the abandoned building that's on there for us to then build it into a home and occupy it. Now, it's not massive, it's not large. It's only about a quarter of an acre. But to find something with no money, with a building, and the opportunity to live that desire that God requires us to have, well, it's possible. I would never have thought in my wildest dreams that the Lord can provide something like that. But nor did the Israelites believe that they were able to leave Egypt. It was impossible for them. All the hindrances was before them. But the only thing that was stopping them from leaving was themselves. They were worried about the food, where they were going to live, the accommodation, everything, all the concerns that they had. But we're told that had they not put their feet in the water, God would never have opened the door. Now, remember I said to you, I never would have moved to Wales if I knew that I didn't have that job, that pretend job. Because everything was all mapped out. I planned this and I planned that. But it didn't go the way that I planned. It went the way the Lord planned it. So that opportunity made itself available to us. There are some other nuances and other things that can be added and other areas to the story and our other journey. But that was the pinnacle of where we had come from, flats in Derby, to a caravan, then to our first little country home, and then to a abandoned piece of land that we can turn into a little home with a little small, tiny farm where we can hopefully use. And what we do with that is yet in the making and yet in the planning. But my point is that don't wait to have all the money. Don't wait to have the job, because those opportunities are already laid before you. I've been here for about 13 years now, and I've never been without a job since I've been here. And I've had some pretty good, decent, well-paying and advantageous jobs. So I'll close my presentation there. There is more that I would wish to add, and I believe we could probably go into that into part 2 in a bit more detail. But hopefully your feet are a little bit wet, and that kind of opens up a door of opportunity for yourselves, because I can put a guarantee on this. Matthew 7 verse 7 tells us ask. I once heard a story by a man, and he said basically he asked God for a plane, and he asked him for, just a little cheap plane just to start doing his missionary work. And the Lord gave him a plane. He spent most of the time fixing that plane in his missionary endeavors. And he said, if only I just said, Lord, give me a working plane, give me a brand new plane. But he didn't have the faith. We don't ask God for big things. We ask him maybe to help us pay our rent at the end of the month, or to help us fix our car, but we don't ask him for big things. And we need to ask ourselves, why don't we ask for big things? Because Matthew 7 verse 7 tells us, ask, seek, and find. And all of these properties that I've lived in, that I've experienced, in whether, it's from, a large little house to a small little bungalow or so, I've asked certain things, whether it be I don't pay deposits, or we want the rent reduced, or anything like that. Always the Lord fits that property or the circumstances to our circumstances, to his glory. So yeah, I hope that was pretty clear. I know there might be lots of questions or anything that you're not clear on, but hopefully we can add some more flesh to that as we talk, and maybe as our next presentation comes up in July, I think. Yeah.
The end of all things is near at hand. The signs are rapidly fulfilling. Yet it would seem that but few realize that the day of the Lord is coming. The end of all things is near at hand. The signs are rapidly fulfilling. Yet it would seem that but few realize that the day of the Lord is coming, swiftly, silently, as a thief in the night. Many are saying peace and safety, unless they are watching and waiting for their Lord. They will be taken as in a snare, a science of the devil. What is soon coming upon us? A science of the devil.